All right, thanks everybody for joining us today. We're going to talk about the MSP blueprint for how to build a security practice. And I'm David Powell, and I've been in the MSP space a long time, longer than I probably care to admit, 20 plus years, mostly inside MSPs. I've had a couple of stints outside on the vendor side, and I'm back on the vendor side now at Perch Security. We also have Wes Spencer, who's our Chief Information Security Officer at Perch. Wes, tell us a little bit about your background and how you, what your experience looks like.
Yeah, right on. So David, thank you and appreciate you bringing me on as well. So I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Perch, which just means I do all things internal and external security thought leadership for our clients and inside of Perch. I come out of financial services, so I've been heavily involved in banks and running bank security for a number of years before coming on board at Perch, and absolutely love topics like this, David. It is so much fun to collaborate and knowledge share around cybersecurity because, David, I don't know what you think, but cybersecurity is a huge topic for MSPs, and they are hungry for it.
They really are. You know, Wes, what's interesting before we get started is like, in the early 2000s and stuff, MSPs were kind of struggling, like what goes in my MSP service catalog, right? And they're like, do I include backups? Do I include disaster recovery? How do I include hardware as a service? And now if you go to most MSPs websites and go to their, services, they all kind of do a lot of the same stuff. Security, however, not there yet. Everyone's still trying to figure out what does that look like? How do I build a security practice? And there's not a kind of a set of catalog quite yet for that. It's interesting, Mark Twain always said, good writers borrow, great writers steal, and there's nobody yet to really kind of go steal what this looks like. So today, hopefully we can kind of give you that blueprint on how to build that security practice. So I think there's a lot of thirst in the MSP space for the content for today. The first thing I want to talk about is this idea of like, Wes and I talk about this a lot, get your house in order, right? You can't sell what you don't do. And this very ugly guy here is to represent, I kind of talk about this idea of, let's say that your client decided that they wanted to get fit. They were going to hire a personal trainer and get fit. And they go to the gym and they just bought all their new workout clothes and, you're ready to go. And the personal trainer shows up and it's this guy, right? And he's, shoving a Big Mac in his face, washing it down with a Mountain Dew. You would not take advice from this guy around personal fitness at all, right? You would completely ignore everything he had to say around personal fitness. The struggle there, though, is most MSPs don't do security for themselves very well. So they're going out and trying to talk to their clients about security, and they kind of lack that credibility. They're the 400-pound personal trainer. Wes, the risk inside the MSP space is like real and actual. What do we see in the MSP space with security risk?
Yeah. So first of all, David, I don't know how you got a picture of me back in college, but I'm never going to let you live this down.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, it is real. And let me start with this first. So one of the things I run into so many conversations with our MSP partners and new partners into Perch, and they ask those questions, David. They're like, how do I get this going? How do I sell it? I'm not confident with it. How do I message it in ways that can get someone to buy? Because I'm afraid they're going to say no. They always say no. They don't want to spend more money. And you're right. I have learned the MSPs that are really good at selling cybersecurity really practice it well themselves. And totally to answer your question, the days of MSPs being inactive and not caring about security are gone. I mean, we see the news, we see MSP after MSP being hit. I just saw one on Krebs just recently today of a pretty large hit. This is happening all the more. And so inaction is no longer an excuse. We've got to do more. And you are right. It starts with ourselves. And we're going to talk about that in this talk today, about how we start with ourselves, how we get this going, and the steps we need to take, because the risk has changed. And we are now under the crosshairs of cyber threat actors that know who you are, know who we are, and are definitely going after us to operationalize us in what we call a buffalo jump attack, which we'll talk about in a bit, David.
Yeah, and Wes, when you and I first got to know each other back in January, one of the things that you said is like still stuck with me is like, they know your tools. Right. I think you mentioned that the bad actors are going off and getting certified on all the MSP tools. And that was one of those things that I could feel my stomach like, is that it's not randomized. They have a playbook they're executing against MSPs, which is really, new in the past like year or so.
Yeah, I mean, think about this for a minute. Like this is shocking to me. If you think about what an RMM does, An RMM is a way for me to easily, from any location, as long as I have access, run any software, deploy any script, apply any command that I want. You know, in the world of bad guys, you know what they call that? They call that an exploit kit. So once bad guys woke up to the fact that an RMM is a native inbuilt exploit kit just waiting for their access, it's like the bad guy mindset went when they realized, holy crap, if we can operationalize and attack the RMM, we don't even have to load exploit kits. We have them ready to go for us through the RMM, right? And so, yeah, what we've seen is bad guys have learned the RMM, and I don't care what RMM it is. I mean, we'll pick on all of them. It's not the weakness of the RMM. It's the fact that that's their treasure trove. That's the goal they're trying to go after. And yes, I mean, you talk to Chris Lair, for example, from Solace, he'll tell you, I have been through many incidents where these guys know the RMMs better than the MSPs do, and they can deploy ransomware, turn off backups, and cause systemic damage in a matter of mere minutes because they're experts at the RMM.
That's crazy. You know, the way that I try to describe this when I talk to MSPs, it's like if you and I were the bad guys, if we were the baddies, is it harder for us to break into each one of these apartment units individually, or is it easier for us to break into the supervisor's office, get the master key, and then just unlock them all at once? And that's really what the bad guys are looking at the MSP. The MSP is the supervisor with the master key to all those apartments. So ultimately the bad guys are kind of lazy. You know, they're kind of looking for the easy score. And man, if you can get through the MSP, all the downstream clients become opportunities for the bad guys. So it's super important as MSP to protect each one of these apartment units, right? They're depending on you to protect them because you've got the master key to all those with your RMM and a master set of passwords and admin creds and expectation of being in their systems doing certain things. So it is a 100% legitimate concern. It's 100% happening. And most MSPs just have not quite kind of woken up to like, uh-oh, this is real. And this is something I need to pay attention to. You know, as we talk to other MSPs, one of the things I always want to kind of talk to them about is how to think about their client base. And there's all sorts of stuff wrapped up in that around risk and stuff. And Wes, you came from the practitioner side. Talk to us about like the first four things up here and how you would think about your client base if you're an MSP.
Yeah, for sure. So if you don't know me, I used to be a professor of information security back in the old days. And so we could turn each of these into its own like college course. And I won't do that to you, I promise. But it is important that we understand why these things apply to us and why we use the terminology, right? So first of all, risk profile. The thing you've got to realize when we're talking about risk profile, what is that company doing? Is it regulated? What do they serve? What kinds of clients do they serve? Who do they serve? Are they a 24/7 shop? Are they just a mom and pop? A heavy cloud presence? Are they completely, no cloud at all? I mean, there's a lot of questions that we need to ask ourselves to understand the profile of that company, who they are, what they serve, and what we need to address. And David, just to like really simplify that one, let's just talk about CMMC for a minute. This one's hot. It's raging. MSPs are really trying to get their hands around what CMMC is all about because there's a lot of revenue at play and there's a lot of opportunity. And also there's a lot of fiefs to protect as well, because for a lot of DoD manufacturers that CMC applies to them, if their MSP cannot help them with that, they'll eventually have to leave that MSP and go to one that does. So let's talk about that as a profile. Okay, if you are a DoD manufacturer, then CMMC applies to you, which means that their risk profile has a very unique DNA or makeup of who they are and what they have to have addressed inside of their security solutions offering, because they have requirements over their head, which we call regulations, that they have to solve for. And so, to simplify risk profile, one of the things I recommend for MSPs to do, start with a couple different industries. Maybe pick finance and healthcare, or healthcare and CMMC, or whatever it may be, and understand that group. Understand what it is that they need. Understand the critical things. Understand how to message it. Maybe you use certain different words, like in the world of finance, you're going to use things like customer information. But in the world of healthcare, you're going to use EPHI, electronic patient health information. It's similar things, but different terminology, different approaches, different regulatory requirements. And so sometimes we have to be, David, as MSPs, jack of all trade, master of none. There's truth to that. But understanding that risk profile, picking a few, starting small, understanding and mastering that industry, mastering that risk profile, and using that to build a solution offering. And then once you have that mastered, you can go after another industry, and you'll find you're really much more effective in going that direction. David, you have tons of experience at Corsica and other places you've been at. Does that seem to work in your experience as well?
Yeah, I think what you see is, that risk profile is sometimes they are not even aware of all of that, or they just had an auditor come through and say, hey, by the way, here's all the things that you suck at based on this audit, right? And then their risk tolerance, I think it's interesting that some of them are willing to like check a box, and then some are like, no, we're going to be like really truly committed, to this. Also, I think as MSPs, a lot of them don't even know what verticals they serve. They haven't kind of stepped back and said, okay, do we have a vertical in here that we might have missed? I mean, I know some MSPs, and it's kind of interesting. You would look at them from the outside and say, well, they serve a lot of small businesses, but who they really serve are like hedge funds, family offices, high net worth individuals. Those guys have kind of a high risk profile, a very low risk tolerance, but you might just kind of look at them and say, well, it's only 6 or 10 people, in an office. So I think as an MSP, you really have to kind of understand what's the profile, what's the tolerance, do we have verticals, and what compliance regulatory standards, hit our clients. But the hard part about that is it comes into like, what's your price positioning, right? If you're kind of selling cheap, if you're trying to compete on price, it's really hard to go have that security service because it's going to cost more. It's kind of like when the cloud first came out and everybody thought, oh, the cloud's going to be cheaper. Not really. The cloud's more expensive, and unless you're super elastic and had a lot of, up and down workloads. So you have to think, how am I pitching this to my clients? How am I pitching my normal services? And then how do I layer security on top of that? And then the last part, and I really feel too many MSPs fall in this bucket, is, are you doing transactions with your client where they say, hey, I need this, and you give it to them? Or are you truly in a role where you're advising them? And, place I worked previously, we kind of had as one of our sorting criteria and the qualification is, does the client want technology leadership? Are they looking for somebody to guide them? Are they looking for somebody to direct them? Or they kind of know what they want and give it to you? I was a high school debater, and in high school debate, they tell you, kind of lift an argument from one area and set it in another. If it doesn't work over here, it's probably flawed over here. And we used to kind of use that as an example, talking about that as like, hey, you've got to be in an advisory role. If you were an orthopedic surgeon, number one, God bless that medical school had low standards to let you get through. But if you're an orthopedic surgeon and I came in and said, hey, Wes, I need you to cut on my knee, and I need you to, fix my patella tendon. I need you to use this anesthesia. And you're like, whoa, David, why don't we find out what's wrong with you first? But, that's the way too many clients are, is the MSP lets them dictate, and they cede that position of being the leader and advisor. So you're really going to have to reclaim that territory if you don't already have it as the advisor to your client, so you can guide them towards these security things. I think the other question we get a lot of is like, what do we need to put into our service catalog? And, what I would say is on the left side is the stuff that you ought to be doing already, right? These should be part of your standard MSP services: patch management, data backups, firewall, AV. And then you kind of have to explain to the client that there's this whole advanced set of security stuff, and all these are emerging, all these are developing, all these are changing all the time based on the current kind of conditions. But I think a lot of people don't really understand how all these pieces go together. Wes, tell us, what are these pieces at a high level? What do they do? And is this kind of the right stack to think through, is how this stuff goes together?
Yes. So you're right, David. I think one of the questions I get asked often, and I can't tell you how many times I've been in IT Nation back, before the pandemic, and we're actually on site and present with each other. And people, the good old days, right? I long for those to come back, and someone would pull me aside and literally say, Wes, just simplify this. Give me the recipe. What goes into the stack? I just need to know. And I see both sides of that, David. I see one side of like, hey, it's not my job at Perch to tell you what goes in the stack. But then partially I think, well, maybe it does help, because I've built cybersecurity programs, maybe almost from scratch, and I have a really good feel for what should go in and the things that we need. And so let me say a few things. First of all, I do think that it should align to a framework. I think that's the best way to do it. I don't build a house from scratch. I have blueprints and a framework to go off of, and I follow that because many houses have been built before my house. And so for me, just to build a house from scratch is senseless. Same with cybersecurity. If you feel like you're starting from scratch, you shouldn't. You should be following a framework. So when you dive into a framework, you're going to see some of these things. And so, David, what we wanted to do, in the interest of being simplistic, but also really making you feel like you're carrying away from our 20-minute talk with valuable information, I wanted to list some of them. So first of all, mobile device management. This is important. The more we have mobility in our fleet, you are seeing regulations push this, but also just best practice, where our people go, what's happening on these devices here, where they go, what they're using, files they're sharing and accessing, and how do we decommission and recommissioning devices. That's really important stuff. So MDM needs to be in there. Multi-factor. I think almost every MSP now is pushing very heavily multi-factor. That's good. Do know and do note that multi-factor is not the end of security breaches. If you have multi-factor everywhere, one of the things I talked about in the last IT Nation talk, and we're seeing come true, is OAuth attacks that are going after a lack of multi-factor, where it's circumventing it, is how I should say it. But multi-factor is critically important. You must have it enabled for everybody. It's critically important. You've really got to consider either bundling that in or just making sure it's a mandated standard, because multi-factor is critically important. We know that. DNS filtering, I think a lot of MSPs understand this really well, so I can kind of skip by this one, but just, applying analytics and behavioral monitoring to DNS filtering. That's important, right? We know that. It's a key to have. Now, SIM and SOC. This is big, right? This is obviously what Perch does. So David, I'm a little biased. I'm a little opinionated on why it's important, but look, let me just distill it this way. Who's watching over everything? We have more security tools and things in place we've ever had before. We have more cloud presence, more mobility than we've ever had before. Simply this question: who's watching over the activity of all of that? MSPs can't build their own SOC. I mean, look at any study, it's 12 to 15 analysts to have a skeleton crew full time. You know as well as I do, that's a multi-million-dollar endeavor that's only for the top of the top MSPs. And I know some very large ones that won't get into it. It's difficult. So Perch does this, and the reason we offer this is because it's simply a managed cybersecurity service. It's not sustainable outside of a partner like Perch. And so pulling that log data information, bringing that into one house, putting analytics on top of it, and behavior monitoring on top of it is really, really important in today's modern day. And then last things, intrusion detection. That's been a big thing that Perch has been all about. What happens when prevention fails? You look at the table stakes over on the left, things like firewall and antivirus, great stuff. Eventually it will fail. And so how do we know when it failed? Yeah. That's where things like intrusion detection pick up, right? And then the last three very quickly, vulnerability scanning, again, becoming table stakes almost, but I can't speak enough for it. It's so important that we're actually doing real vulnerability management and treating it seriously, the things that we see and find and responding back. Awareness training, big. Email protection at the advanced level, also big. We know those things. So David, those are some things that need to go in. There may be some things you might take out and certainly things you might put in, and I think that's totally fine, but definitely a very good look at some of the requirements and an advanced modern package.
An easy way to explain these is like the foundational is signature based, right? It looks at against a list of known bad things, and advanced is anomaly based, right? What seems abnormal and stuff. And so it's a good way to kind of characterize it pretty easily if you're trying to think about a framework to consider those aspects. The other piece, we'll kind of move through this quickly, is like, you need dedicated people on your team. Assessments really kind of start this sales process. So you need to be able to do the assessment and take it through. You don't have guys on your team that have just like suddenly become good at security, like they might at Python or scripting or something. Wes, we all know this, but like the phraseology is very unique. I mean, it's important to have guys that live and breathe this stuff, isn't it?
Yes. And let me give you, and I'm cognizant of our time here, David. There's so much we could say, but in 30 seconds, I just got off a call right before you and I recorded this, just got off a call that went phenomenal. It's a very large healthcare deal that our partner, I promise you, is going to win. It is going to be a very good 6-figure annual deal for them. And you know why it went so well, David? They actually spent the last month with that client doing an assessment. And out of the assessment came a risk-based approach of gaps to fill. And so when we were brought into that conversation, it was, hey, here is our trusted solution provider that meets these gaps that you have, Mr. Healthcare client, in these areas. And David, it went swimmingly. There was no difficulty in explaining what we did because they started with a solid assessment that had credibility behind it and vocabulary specific to healthcare. It made it such an easy transition and sales process.
That's right. And I think the way to tie that out is, just like accounting firms have audit and tax groups because they're very specialized and do different things, I think it's important for MSPs to think, hey, we want to create a security practice, right? You can't use your same support desk that supports your normal service delivery motion and have those guys dabble in security, right? You really need to staff it that way, which also goes back to why you don't build your own SOC so that you can have FTEs dedicated to security on there. Hey, Wes, so if an MSP wanted to start back and hire somebody dedicated to the security team, like where do they even find those people? Where are they in existing companies that they can go get?
I mean, you might be lucky, right? You might luckily find someone inside the org that can handle it. But even those that I know, some of our partners have some brilliant analysts on staff. They'll be the first to tell you I'm the only one, or maybe there's two of us. And so again, building out a full team, David, 24/7, and not just the technical analyst team, but those that do risk assessments and, align and be the VCIO and VCSOs. It's so hard to find that. It's almost impossible. And by the way, by the time you find one, chances are they're already out the door for a higher paying job elsewhere. I've seen that happen at the bank that I led. And so this is where finding partners like Perch is really important, because we mandate and we handle those challenges internally running our SOC, and we can then provide the service on top without you having to go find and retain that talent in security, which, as we know, is difficult.
So then maybe find somebody internally who's smart, has aptitude, and has an interest in security, and then train them up internally to be on that dedicated team.
Yeah, so, and then they build and run the Perch relationship and others that they work with. Exactly, yes.
So here's the blueprint that we covered. Get your own house in order. Don't be that 400-pound personal trainer. Analyze your client base. What kind of risk do you have in your clients? What's their risk tolerance, their risk profile? What compliance with regulatory stuff do they have? Look to add offerings to your current catalog. You're doing foundational. What are the things you can add on the advanced side? You want some dedicated people that are immersed, who live and breathe security on your team, and then look to build out that dedicated practice over time. And I think that's the some easy steps. They're hard to do, but some easy steps to look at on how to build a security practice if you're an MSP. So we appreciate your time today. We hope that this is helpful for you. And, please don't forget to fill out the session survey at the end. I don't know if they break it down by speaker, but I'll take 5. You can give Wes some 4s.
I'll take it.
Thanks, everybody.